I calling to order the Executive Committee Thursday, November 4th, 2021 of MWPA. Allison, please call the roll to make sure we have a quorum present.
Novato Fire District.
Here.
County of Marin.
Here.
City of Mill Valley.
Here.
Town of Ross.
Here.
City of San Rafael.
Here.
A quorum is present with all 5 members.
Thanks everybody. Entertain a request to adjust the order of the agenda. Any requests? And I'm seeing none. This is time for public expression. Public's welcome to address the committee at this time on matters not on the agenda and that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. And please be advised that pursuant to the government code, committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 3 minutes, and you should be respectful of the community. Please silence your cell phones during the meeting, and please mute your microphone if you're not speaking or reporting out. So Allison, do we have any members of the public like to speak to us?
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Okay, thanks all. Let's move on to the Executive Officer report. Mark, please, you'll present this item.
Good morning, President Goins, committee members. Wow, it's November. And first things I'd pass along Anne's regrets for not being at the meeting, but she's supporting San Rafael today through their hiring process for some veg management type specialist positions. So we felt it was important to have Anne there and support San Rafael. And let me share my screen real quick. And I just realized I wanted to add something to this, but I can cover it verbally. Rain, we all been talking about rain and what does it mean? And I think this group especially knows that, the rain that we received in those historical amounts simply put a pause on what could be a dry winter that could still have a wildfire threat. If we don't continue to have healthy rain at healthy intervals, then we can get right back into the fire regime that we've been in. And one of the things about historic rain like that, all that water did not get absorbed into the fuels. The fuels can only absorb the water so fast. So much of that water didn't really absorb into fuels. It actually, in a lot of cases, went into our reservoirs, which is another good thing for us. And in California, a lot of the fire agencies have stopped calling it fire season. And what they're doing is calling it preparedness levels. So we're going from a peak staffing interval and transitioning into winter preparedness. And I think one of the messages that we want to share with our public is that there's winter preparedness for the public. Just because we're not in fire season doesn't mean they shouldn't be doing any work around their homes. This is a perfect opportunity for home hardening. It's a perfect opportunity to swap out maybe some vegetation that they had swap in because they weren't irrigating during the summer. Now that there's rain, it would be a good time to plant drought tolerant plants now that are also fire resistant. So we're working on that piece. And so we're also looking to partner with our water agencies and having a similar message of drought tolerant plants and fire tolerant plants to make sure that we're recommending the same types of plants. I've been very happy with the rollout of our website. We've been receiving a lot of positive comments. I appreciate the look that the COC took with the website, and they really looked at it from the constituent view to make sure that it had the accessibility that our residents need to have, also looking at our transparency. And they even reached out to someone that they really feel is a web design expert, and just glowing reviews from that group. They obviously found a few places where we can fix some items. We've been in the process of fixing those items, but they've really been minor. A lot of it has to do with our records of meetings where it's bit by bit, we're getting each of our meetings to align in the way that they need to be displayed in our Granicus website. But the visits have obviously gone up. We applied analytics to the website yesterday. So unfortunately, I don't have the analytics from the beginning of the new page to now. But I do know that we inadvertently turned on our grants website or page from being under development to actually it went live. And it was live for less than an hour. And I received 2 email requests for more information on those grants saying that they're ready to apply. So less than an hour, we had 2 people visit that web page that wasn't supposed to be up yet. So it makes me think that a lot of people are visiting our site, and our web developer is actually through his analytics has been seeing a lot of visits to his site coming from our site. So that's one of the ways that we've been able to tell that we're getting a lot of visits. The COC recruitment went live on Monday. I think any of the member agencies who have helped share that message, we're reaching out to the IJ and the Light. We've left messages with them. We're waiting for their phone calls so we can get those ads. I was targeting a mid-month advertisement on Sunday for the IJ and a mid-month weekly for the Light. So we're still on pace for that. And it'll all be on our website for them to apply. It already is on. And speaking of COC, we do have Larry Chu on the panel today to help present our staff report. Speaking of reports, our annual reports, we are starting the campaign yesterday, actually, to get the word out. We put it on the banner or on our website. We shared that information through our social media. And later today or tomorrow, I'll be reaching out to all of our member agencies like I did for the COC to help share that information. I'll be reaching out to some of you to get some of your other affiliations that you can think of to help us share that. And we've placed an order for 40 hard copies of the report. And the goal is that each board member, and if where appropriate, the member agencies to get a copy for their front office and such. Grant program development is going well. We still are on target for a mid-November launch of that program. We are just about to enter into our beta testing. And right now we have staff that's testing the systems. And then through our DSI portal and through our Chipper Days portal, people who have requested grants through that, they'll probably be invited to participate in the beta test. So that way we can have all the kinks, it will be impossible to have all the kinks, most of the kinks ironed out before we launch that program. We're also continuing to work with our member agencies to make sure that the grant program meets all of our needs. We've had 3 meetings for our objectives and metrics. Our objectives now are in semi-final draft form after 3 meetings. And our next meeting, probably our next 2 meetings, will include the development of our metrics. And we are also working with our web developer for a dashboard, not just a dashboard for the metrics, but also building now the process for the 22-23 work plan. It'll all be an interactive process through our website. And it'll be like a whole one-touch principle that once the data is entered into the development of the work plan, that data won't have to be touched unless it's amended all the way through cradle to grave for that project. So we're trying really to increase the efficiency of our systems and decrease the duplicative work. We've had 2 very successful, I think, is the best, or great participation. Let's put it that way. We've had great participation of our 2 strategic ad hoc subcommittee meetings so far. We have our 3rd that is coming up on the 9th, and we're going to do it in person. Everybody is vaccinated. We have a space that allows us to have social distancing, and we just felt like it was just going to be so much more productive to do it in person. So thank you, San Rafael Fire, for allowing us to use the EOC training room. And I really look forward to that. One of the directions to the strategic ad hoc subcommittee has given us is to create a draft staffing plan, identify whether they would be full-time employees or half FTE, where the funding source would come, whether they would be MWPA employees or perhaps contract employees. So we've been putting the final touches on that. We continue to expand our partnerships. I'm very much looking forward to tomorrow, where we are bringing the 1TAM agencies and the Marin Fire agencies together at Bear Valley Visitor Center. And we're going to do a walkthrough of the Woodward Fire. And then we continue to increase our partnership with the North Bay Watershed Association, and that's how we're going to partner with the Drought Smart and Fire Smart landscaping principles. Supervisor Rodoni, Supervisor Rice, Chief Weber, myself, and staff from the CDA had a meeting to talk about the coastal zone and all of the work that we are doing within the coastal zone and making sure that we comply with coastal zone regulations. The three specific areas that we're working on is defensible space for the homeowners, de minimis, and one of these days I'll learn how to say that word right, waivers for our evacuation route work. And then when we start doing larger projects, we will need what's called a public works plan. And we have a game plan for each of those three. They're still draft game plans, and we'll be sure to share them with the full board when they become more than draft game plans. And then we have our prescribed fire panel on November 16th, which I've invited you all to. I think we have convened an excellent panel, and I look forward to seeing you all there. And in closing, I'd also like to make sure that you all are introduced to Emily Longfellow. She is here in place for Megan. Megan's daughter's having just a minor surgical procedure done on her hand for a ganglion cyst. Just making sure it's a procedure that her daughter's had before. No, they expect it to go well, but Emily's here to support us through this meeting. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Directors, questions for Mark? Sashi, please.
This is for Mark and also maybe for Bruce. I think we talked before the rains came about whether or not the water was going to get absorbed and how that was going to affect the fuels and what do they call that? The short running fuels are like a 10-hour fuels or so I'm assuming that with all the water, we're going to see a bunch of grass growth, right? So what should we expect to see, and what are the implications for fire kind of in the sort of medium term after that? And Bruce, I'm curious what your thoughts are on if that has any effect on the the madrones and the things that you've been kind of talking about lately. So just curious, Mark, if you can give us some brief way to think about what that will do to fuels.
Great.
Absolutely.
If you want to go first, Mark, I'll go second. Yeah.
Sounds good. The 100-hour fuels and the 1,000-hour fuels. And so we're talking 3 to 8 inches and an 8 to 12 inches in diameter. They've really spiked in their moisture, but the 10-hour or the 100-hour fuels are already starting to drop. And that's to be expected. It's really the medium and heavy fuels that we are concerned about through droughts, because it took them years to become that dry. And I'm particularly worried this time because we had 2 droughts separated by a single rain year or regular rain year. So the heavy fuels are going to take years to recover, years of normal rainfall to recover. And even if we have an extraordinary rain year, those fuels are still going to be dry. And historically, whenever we have a drought busting rain year, we have a critical fire season that follows, because those dry fuels haven't recovered yet, but we have an abundant crop of grass that can ignite the heavier fuels. So thank you for asking. And then I'll leave it to Bruce's expertise for that next question.
Yes, Sashi, it's a really wonderful question. And I'd say that in a normal fall rain season, when you have relatively healthy forests, the live oaks and the bays, the California bays, and all the other trees that have green leaves, that first rain, the trees don't just need soil water. They actually breathe the water in through their leaf surfaces. They have these structures called stoma, which is basically these things that open and close, and they open up and they drink it in. So during a normal fall, this would replenish the crown. It would help to replenish them, make them feel healthy. But as you all know, we've lost substantial leaf surface area for the bays and for the Pacific madrone. Leaf gone means not drinking water in, number one. So they're dependent upon soil moisture. But the other issue is that these crowns, the stems that hold these leaves, they've been damaged by the sun. So you have sun scalded. It'd be like having a burn on your arm. It doesn't repair. The rain doesn't change it. So we have, I will just put forth that we have a substantially damaged crown in those areas that are showing stress, and that they're not being quenched by the lack of leaves. No leaves, brown leaves and brown and yellow leaves don't breathe in. They have an abscission layer. They're no longer talking to the tree, and they're basically on the ground. So, I think we're still we're in transition here. We're on brand new territory. Call this a new paradigm. Thank you, Julie. But we're going to have to make some observations this spring, when we would normally see coming into the fall, we would see leaf buds forming. The question is, are we going to see buds? Are they normal, or are they big, small, or are they not forming? And then secondly, when the new leaves come out, I think time will tell, but it's going to be March, April, May, when we're really going to see a difference here. I say the jury's completely out, and the stands are still in trouble. Any other questions for Mark? Julie?
Thank you. Mark, I was just hoping that maybe you can share the website analytics once you get your arms wrapped around those, perhaps at a board meeting.
Absolutely. But like you said, I'll have to get my arms wrapped around it. I looked at the analytics page today and I'm like, wow, I'm going to need, and they look like stereo instructions. So I'm going to have to learn how to analyze that.
Great.
It'd be great to have maybe a comparison of the prior website hit rate with the current one so that we can see the improvement.
Yep, maybe like the top 10 pages by views, unique
Yeah,
views.
unfortunately, I don't think we had analytics on the old website.
Ah,
So I'll have to look into that.
okay, thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Other questions, comments? Mark, I have a question. You talked about this game plan. Let's make sure that the public doesn't let their guard down with the rain. And we have plans to communicate. Who's going to take the lead on that? And can you just real quick? I mean, are we going to use the IJ, radio? I mean, all the other links that we have. I mean, there is actually an intended campaign to try to reach out to the public and make sure that they don't drop their guard and use this opportunity to make some critical changes.
And we are going to be using our the Fire Safe Marin public education portal, and that'll be our primary tool, and then also partnering with our member agencies to help with that consistent messaging. For the fire beat that we did, we filmed 2 days ago. We started that conversation, and we'll continue to push it out through Fire Safe Marin and then with our member agencies as partners.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Hey, Julie.
Sorry, as part of my role as a Marin Master Gardener IJ reporter, my next article, anyway, in January, I will be doing an article about fire resilient gardening.
Nice.
And so, Mark, I will talk to you because I really appreciated what you said about how we don't have a fire season anymore. We need to be winter preparedness,
Yep.
in winter preparedness mode. So that will be the theme of my article.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Julie, I should let you know that I actually have a new job that kind of ties into what you're talking about there. I am the UC Cooperative Extension's Wildfire Vegetation Mitigation Program Manager for the County of Sonoma. So so interacting with the Master Gardener program. So we should talk about that. I'm excited about your article too.
That's awesome, Sashi. And Marin is in the process of hiring someone like that too. So that's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, a fire smart coordinator. Yeah, I'm working with Steve
Yes.
Swain on that too. Yeah, let's talk.
Awesome.
Let's talk.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Well, let's see, board. Let's move on. And any other questions or comments? Let's move on to public, please. Allison.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Great. Back to committee for any further discussion. Congratulations, Sashi and Julie. And we're excited about your article. And I do hope that you find a way to talk about the resources available with MWPA and the wildfire mitigation specialist that will knock on your door and write prescriptions and help you identify what you need to move, where and when and how. You could maybe kind of just pull a lot of this stuff all together with your masterful writing.
Sounds like you've already written it for me, Bruce. Thank you.
Oh, you know. Okay, well, let's move on to consent calendar. Item 6, the opportunity for the public to comment on consent calendar items will occur prior to the committee's discussion of the calendar. Committee may approve the entire consent calendar with one action. As an alternative, items on the calendar may be removed by any committee or staff member for separate discussion. So we'll now take public comment on the consent calendar.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Okay, any committee members wish to pull an item? I'm seeing no. So
I'll move to approve the consent calendar.
thank you, Julie. A
I'll
motion.
second.
Rachel, second. Allison, roll call, please.
Novato Fire District,
Aye.
County of Marin,
Aye.
City of Mill Valley.
Aye.
Town of Ross,
Aye.
City of San Rafael.
Aye.
The motion passes with 100%.
Thanks. Thank you.
Bruce, just a note, the action was to receive the report, actually not technically to approve it.
Oh, thank you, sir.
So you might check with the mover and the seconder that that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. Yes, and Julie.
Aye.
And yes, thumbs up. Thank you, Dennis. Perfect. Okay. Let's see, move on to the Citizens Oversight Committee. Mark Brown and the Citizens Oversight member chair, Larry Chu, are going to present this item. Welcome, Larry and Mark.
Thank you, Board President Goins, members of the Executive Committee. For a couple of you who I haven't met, I'm Larry Chu. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Citizens Oversight Committee today. First part of the year, we've been basically in an organizational mode, getting our bylaws set up, our procedures. We now have subcommittees that have been set up and going through some of the various oversight processes. We have a finance and a work plan subcommittee that are there to confirm that the projects and the initiatives are consistent with the use of Measure C proceeds. We also have a committee that looks at the practices of the MWPA in terms of ensuring that the public has access to the decisions that are made by the agency and processes in which those decisions are made. And there's a fourth committee that is going to be taking all this information and writing up an annual report. The COC members have always said that they may attend certain meetings of the Executive Committee, the Finance Committee, or the Operations Committee. And some of the things they may do would be to ask exploratory questions on topics that are of interest. They may have items to report directly from the committee, and they may also bring up other things that they consider relevant to the practices and the operation of the MWPA. What I'm here to ask you to consider is that the COC be included as part of the reporting as a standard agenda item in the committee reports for each meeting. And what we'd like to be able to do is to have reports from the COC be included in the meeting packets in advance. COC members, might be free to ask and speak, during public open comment, but no one can actually take a position on an agenda item unless authorized in advance to speak in behalf of the COC. This particular item to be included as a standing item on the committee reports from the COC would be on a trial basis for 12 months. So at this point, I'd just like to turn it over to Executive Officer Mark Brown and see if he has anything that he'd like to add in terms of his analysis or his recommendations. ultimately, the COC is looking to take more of a proactive, have their work be more proactive rather than reactive, which is the main purpose of being included in the various committee meetings.
Thank you, Larry. And what I thought I would bring up is some of the impacts for the MWPA, both positive impacts and potential negative impacts that can't end, but the negative impacts can be avoided if this is handled properly. And I think the biggest positive impact is that, this is a concept that's no other COC really has been looking at things in this way. And if we're looking at what's best for taxpayer dollars, sometimes a retrospective look may not be what's best for taxpayers. That means that we can go a full year of spending Measure C proceeds on something that perhaps we should not have been spending the proceeds on. That's one of the biggest impacts, and including the COC as a committee report on our agendas shows us that we are open and inviting of this oversight and making sure that we are doing the right thing. And quite frankly, any of the members of the COC could submit a letter or otherwise, in this case, it's a staff report, but they could submit a letter and would be included in our documentation. They're free to speak during public comment. I think what we're allowing here would simply eliminate the 3-minute time frame that they would be held to through public comment. The risk. It's important that we keep the Citizen Oversight Committee in an oversight role rather than an advisory and advocacy role. And I think the process that we developed where if it's a new agenda item, that member would be asking inquisitory type questions only, fact finding, and then to bring back to the COC for their deliberation to in their opinion, whether or not a particular project or process that we're establishing is in alignment with Measure C language. And then if the COC as a whole offers an opinion, then that's when it would be formed into a staff report written by the COC with my support, and then submitted to the board for a presentation by a COC member that's been authorized to speak on behalf of the COC, because one of the stipulations in the COC's bylaws is that no member can speak on behalf of the COC unless authorized by the full COC following a deliberation. So I think this really helps create a new form of a COC that could be proactive without being in an advocacy or an advisory role. And I'm in full support of the direction that we're going with this. And I look forward to your questions, comments, and deliberations.
Okay, thank you, Larry, and thank you, Mark. Excellent start to this. I really appreciate the background and description. So let's start Sashi first and then Julie.
Thank you, Bruce. Larry, so nice to see you. It's been way too long. Know Larry from his role when, as a longtime Larkspur Council member, where he did a tremendous amount of good, particularly in the area of looking at financials. So I wanted to recognize that with Larry to start. I think you guys gave a very good overview. So I think there are kind of two things going on. One is the Citizens Oversight Committee's role as per the tax measure is to, on an annual basis, to do that review and make sure that MWPA was fulfilling its obligation to the taxpayers. So and we want to keep that, I think, primary. However, this is a body, an MWPA does a lot of work that has some technical components to it, and the financials also have some technical components that I think would take some time for COC members to absorb and understand and be able to give the best kind of feedback. So having the COC more involved or more participatory, showing up to meetings and understanding what's going on, I think only makes them better at their job at the end of the year. That said, I don't think it's appropriate for the COC to turn the ship mid-year. The idea is to look back and kind of make sure that we're doing the right things, unless there's something particularly egregious that the COC could raise a flag about, but I think there'd be multiple ways that that flag would be raised, not just the COC. The board is also supposed to be looking over some of that, and our legal counsel. So I am a big fan of the COC being involved more, so that they can be fully informed, fully educated, and able to really make sure that we are meeting our obligation to the taxpayers from their point of view. But I don't have any problem with that report being in the packets. And I like the idea that anyone can certainly speak as a member of the public, of course, but that they wouldn't be speaking as a COC member unless they had the entire committee's authorization. I think that's really important. But I guess my overall comment is the COC has a very defined role per the tax measure. Any moving towards a more active advisory role is outside the scope, and there are and I think maybe it would be helpful to clarify the board's role in that, because the board is that policy oversight on a more, within the year. So maybe that would also be helpful. And I can understand that the members of the COC want to make sure that things aren't going astray, but there are multiple ways in which that's safeguarded, and that's partly our responsibility.
Thanks, Ashi. Julie, and then Rachel, please.
I'm in support of trying this for a year. I don't want to miss any opportunities that we may have a blind spot. I doubt it, because there's so many people involved at the ops and advisory technical and the board, et cetera. But I think the more eyes that we have on what we're doing, and given that we're a new, evolving, emerging agency, I think that's really good. The one question I had was the staff report said that there would be a standing agenda item for executive, finance, and ops. And I was wondering if those are the only three, or if, Mark, you're also contemplating the regular board meeting and advisory technical. Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
And Larry can chime in as well, but through the deliberations of the COC, they recommended those 3 meetings.
Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Mark. Rachel, please.
I believe right now I'm more aligned with where Sashi is in her comments. I'm concerned that we're creating a different type of COC, and it will undermine the work of the COC. And I know there's this idea of wanting to be proactive, but that by definition of a COC, it's retrospective. So I'm a little bit concerned that potentially, and it's just playing the different scenarios, potentially the COC could get very engaged on a particular topic or issue and of expressing an opinion, and then we've discounted the role of that COC. And then we're going to then the community might respond, just playing scenarios, might respond that our COC is not being effective because they're not playing the role that they've been designated to play. Now, in terms of trying this out, I think if we want to try it out in the finance committee, because that is the role of the COC, is to show it within the finance world, try it out in the finance committee and maybe under a smaller time frame. I also want to make sure that we're planning a COC for the long term. If we set this as a precedent for the next 10 years of the COC, I'm not sure all those COC members will align to this, opportunity or work or additional time to be spending around the COC. So I'm a little bit concerned, just as we've done to look at other organizations, how other organizations have been done. I've had some experience with some COCs, and this is the first time I've heard of a model where they've come to active meetings. I feel like this is a different role.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for your points. Dennis, please.
Thanks, Bruce. I first need to apologize. I made a mistake on the consent calendar. It wasn't an approved item. I was looking at the wrong place. So probably I should stop talking right now, but I won't. I think that Mark and the Citizens Advisory Committee put a lot of effort into this, trying to make this work for them. And I guess if I'm just a little bit cautious, I'm really worried about that governance is our responsibility, and that's really where I come from. We're the ones that are elected. We're the ones that are ultimately responsible to the voters. The COC is an important function of all that, but it really is advisory to this governance board. And as mandated by the ballot measure, it's been identified what their role is. I think the JPA may have some language in it that opens up that window a little bit for some other potential work of the Oversight Committee. I think the bottom line is I'm willing to see how this works, the pilot, but I also am sensitive to some of the things that Rachel mentioned, which is maybe a little smaller piece of the pie, finance first, try it for a few months, see how it works. Because we're such an open and transparent body with all of our subcommittees being Brown Act, there's so much opportunity for public input in all variety of ways, including the COC can be providing that input. So I think it's ultimately our responsibility to make sure everything's spent properly and follows the guidance of the ballot measure. And it's ultimately the Citizens Committee to see how we've done that and critique that. So I'm not sure looking backwards is a bad way to do it. I know other Citizens Advisory Committee, some just meet once a year basically, or make a presentation if there's some change to the board or some spending change or percentage change recommended. But, so this would be something quite different. Again, saying I'm willing to try it to see how it works, because I think a lot of work has gone into this. But as soon as I see it's interfering with the governance of this group, I would be strong to stand up and say this isn't going right at any point in the pilot. So thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Let's see, I see two hands up, and I'm not sure if these are residual comments or Sashi, your hand up, and then Rachel.
I think we probably both have new comments. I appreciate what Dennis just said there. And I wanted to build on one of his last comments and say, just to be very clear, as members of the public, I think that we all highly encourage them to be as participatory as members of the public as they would like. So, as Dennis mentioned, there are many opportunities for the public to be engaged. All those meetings are public and Brown acted, and this, I think, none of us are saying that any interested COC member shouldn't attend and be, highly engaged as a member of the public. It's whether you're engaged as a member of the COC and what that entails. And if they're showing up to educate themselves, I think that's all to the good. And if they want to give a report on what they think about, I don't really see the harm in that, but I do like Rachel's suggestion that the focus be on the Finance Committee, because that's their scope. And I did want to comment on Mark, your thought about eliminating the 3-minute time frame for public comment for them. I don't think that's appropriate unless they're agendized as to give a presentation. Like, Larry's here, he's agendized, he's speaking, he's giving a presentation. So of course he's not speaking as a member of the public and with a 3-minute time limit. But if any of his COC fellow committee members were to want to comment, that would be a public 3 minutes public comment, as we do for anything. So we just need to stay consistent. When a member of the COC is interacting as a member of the public, they follow all the rules as a member of the public. When they're interacting as a COC, that should be framed up according to their scope there. And I bet Rachel probably has some additional comments in that vein.
And if I may, I did not mean to infer that we would drop the 3 minute for public comment on the COC member. My inference was if they are agendized as an item, then they are not bound by the 3 minutes.
Right. Thanks, Mark, for the clarification. Rachel, please.
I don't want to repeat a lot of what was said, which is why I was hand up, hand down. But I would like to mention, for me, as coming into this sort of 1 year into the program, I was not as familiar with everyone on the COC. And when somebody speaks, I'm actually going back and forth looking to see if they are a member of the COC, because it's helpful to know. And if somebody is going to speak during public comment, are they speaking as a community member? Are they speaking as a COC? And so just because to have that frame of reference, it's helpful. So I don't know, just as we identify ourselves from, well, we're not today, obviously, but what city we're representing so people know. I think that it's important that if somebody is speaking, even publicly, I mean, we hold our hat everywhere we go, our elected hat. And I think a COC member needs to hold their hat as well as member of this board. And I think it's a very, very valuable and important position to have. And I want to have that back view, because we need those eyes. We need that input. I don't know if we can, this is more of a discussion, right? This is an action item for us, that if there's an opportunity to revise the motion around this in terms of the request of doing a pilot with finance for, I don't know what the right time frame is. Probably a little bit longer, because 6 months, maybe 6 months, just because the data the financial information is not that reflective on a month-to-month basis. So, whether it's 6 months or 12 months, it's okay. But I think we need to work with it within a smaller forum first and understand. And as everyone said, those public meetings are public meetings, and everyone's input is very important and very valuable.
Thank you, Rachel. Other let's see. I just like to speak on this. I've had Larry. I'll give you a second here. Do you want to respond at this point, or?
I just wanted to clarify. I heard 3 times that people were referring to this particular role as possibly being advisory. We know that the COC has no intention of becoming or being in an advisory role. So it will stay within its boundaries purely in terms of oversight. We've had those discussions several times within the committee, and it's been reinforced a number of times that we're not there to set policy. That's what the board's role is.
And if I may add, Rachel has an excellent point, and it's one that the COC has discussed. And what hat is someone wearing when they speak at public? And in the policies and procedures that the COC developed for themselves, they actually wrote in a procedure that they are speaking at one of our meetings there to clarify if they are speaking as on behalf of the COC or on behalf of themselves as an individual, or perhaps representing another group that they may represent. And I do think having them agendized helps to clarify that if they are agendized and they are speaking, then absolutely they are speaking on behalf of the COC.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, directors. Any other questions or comments for? Okay, I'll just give my 2 cents here, which is starting well over a year ago, my first year as president, I've had telephone deliberations with COC members about their interest in making sure that we are successful. That's their intention here. It's not to find problems and hold anybody up or to, in essence, we have clearly defined roles as the board, the executive committee, and then all of our committees. And I can tell you from my discussions with a number of very formidable folks who we chose these folks because they wanted to be here and to make sure that we stayed on the track. Most of the members of the COC were chosen because they go back 2, 3 civil grand juries in supporting this work and getting the work done. They're looking towards success, not finding problems. And so I'm coming at this from a history of working with teams where, early problem identification leads to early problem solving. And waiting a year makes no sense to me. If we, and Rachel, with due respect, I'm not sure that the financial committee is the place where the deliberations need to go. I personally, when you're talk to the fire chiefs, you know, these are the people that are, they're the boots on the ground. Talk to the ATC. And that's where I'm a little surprised that there's not a request to be a part of the ATC. Everything that we do is generated from the ground up. And all the ideas come from the technical people and the chiefs. And to be able just to ask a question is one thing as a citizen. But I am for supporting this. I'm for giving it a test, whether it's 6 months or 12 months. And then let's shine a light on it throughout, gather some data after 6 months. But I can be real clear from my perspective, my discussions, this is about early problem identification and early problem solving. It is in the best interest of the taxpayer. It's in the best interest of us as a JPA. And so I am for it as it's proposed. If you want to slim it down a little bit, I think we need to test things, not be afraid to let Larry's committee ask questions, or the committee come in on a consensus where they've brought something back after asking a question and hearing, coming back to the COC deliberating under the Brown Act in public and putting together a report that there is something that they feel is a little off that we need to consider and coming to us officially. I want to see it in month 6, not in month 14 or 17. So, you know, I'm for it. This is where I stand. I'd like to give it a try. And with a commitment, Larry and Mark, that you both take the responsibility of assessing what's working well about it, what's not working well about it, and we're certainly not crossing any lines here. But I am speaking in support of trying this after 14 months of deliberations as to what do we want to try. we have something on the table. So anyway, I'd like to give it a try. Julie?
Yeah, I was just going to say that this approach is similar to the approach that we have been taking with ESP in trying to listen and work out issues before they become, you know, ticking time bombs and lines drawn in the sand. So again, I think we should try it for a trial basis. Bruce, I like what you said about instilling in Larry and Mark the boundary and making sure that the boundary is not crossed. And I think with that guidance and with that assurance, we should try it. And after 12 months, have it back on our agenda and evaluate how it went.
And I believe I've crossed the line going into discussion. Although I think we're doing great here. Everyone's doing their best to keep this on track. But Sashi, I saw that you had your hand up, and let's move to the public.
Yeah. So I think your mine was a deliberative comment. Yeah. So let's go ahead and do public comment.
Okay. Well, great. Everybody, thank you so much. Let's go to the public for this, please. Allison, do we have any public commentary? And I see we have Larry. Welcome, Larry. Larry Minikis.
Good morning. I'm very much aligned with the comments that you've been making. And from really day one of the COC, I've been advocating for a very focused role for us and not to go outside of our role and step into what is really the board's role, the elected officials' role to really govern so that we stay clearly within our bounds. My concern is not the current COC, and I've voiced this to our members. I'm more concerned down the road when all of us are off and we've got a whole new team. We don't know what those personalities are going to look like or who thinks that they can have control. And I'm very concerned when we have citizens trying to make decisions who are not technical people. And I do want to see us stay within our role. That's really, I just appreciate all the comments that have been made this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Thanks for your comments. Other members of the public, please. I see we have Stephen Keys. Welcome, Stephen. Did we lose Stephen?
I apologize if I unmuted the wrong person there. Stephen
Okay.
Keesey for public comment.
Okay. So
Welcome.
it was my bad. I hit the wrong button over here. I am on the COC, as was Larry Menike's, as is Larry Menike's, but I'm speaking for myself to stay in line with, I think, what we've agreed we should be doing. One is I want to state that I really am impressed by the quality of your deliberations and the expertise that you, the five of you and the whole board are bringing to this, to your deliberations and to this new organization. My only potential concern, I think, is a human tendency to, when things are going really well, is to think outside of the box and think of new and more things that you might be able to accomplish. A couple of them that have sort of come up in the past that illustrate what I'm talking about is the idea that maybe the MWPA should take responsibility for rehabilitating burned lands, watching over what happens over a long term. My caution is that really within the purview of the MWPA and Measure C. And the other is sort of an expansion of something that Rachel put on. I give her the credit for it last night. A fabulous presentation on earthquakes, fitting into general disaster response, not wildfires, but they're both disasters. In any case, because we've got NRGs throughout the county and are trying to expand them a lot, there is a potential that while MWPA funds directly or indirectly might spill over into promoting that, and we just need to be careful about that. In any case, I don't see the COC's involvement in any of the committee meetings as being a reflection of distrust or criticism. I continue to be amazed and impressed by what you all are accomplishing. So anyhow, just some comments. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Thanks for your comments, range of comments, actually. Let's see. Alice, any of the members of the public want to make a comment here? Lucy, welcome, Lucy Dilworth.
Thank you all for listening today and for your thorough discussion. I wanted to make 2 points. One is that a limitation on the timing of the trial, if you were to go in that direction, would be, I think it wouldn't work because the MWPA is involved at different times of the year with very different processes. And that much of if you were to pick a 6-month period, perhaps there would be very little work plan analysis or even other issues that the COC would be focusing on. So to have a trial that was going through a period when you weren't doing there wasn't any overlap, I don't think would be a fair trial. The other issue is also, were it to be limited to finance, I think that we do, of course, recognize that that is our primary role. However, we do have recognized influence, or we are considering issues such as transparency. And as the Joint Powers Authority formation agreement does provide us with the role of providing feedback to the board. And that's feedback, that's not advising, and it's not dictating. We see this as the most supple mechanism for us to do that rather than issuing reports. And we think that would be cumbersome and also not allow us the feedback when we want to ask a question. We could very, very quickly satisfy our concerns or answer our questions by raising it at the moment and then moving off the topic. This is a way of forestalling further deliberations, issuing reports, because we misunderstood something. So we see this as a very much more supple way of getting our questions answered, allowing us a little bit of feedback back and forth, and then probably satisfying and resolving the whole issue. So thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Lucy. Thanks very much. Allison, any other members of the public?
Looking for any further raised hands from our audience members. And there's no further public comment.
Okay, let's bring this back to the committee for further discussion. Then we've had input from 3 members of the COC, different perspectives. Sashi, please, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think it was, I'm really grateful to those 3 members for giving us their perspective, because now I feel like I have a better understanding of what they were looking for. So it sounds like, well, look, we'd like to, if we were just doing public comment, there's no back and forth allowed. We'd like to have some back and forth. So Mark, do you attend the COC meetings?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so they do have a channel with you directly at the meeting where there's back and forth. So the ask here, just looking at it just logistically, so that is, well, we want to be able to we want to be able to understand what's going on. We want to be able to ask questions. We want to be able to have some back and forth and have a quick response rather than having to formalize those questions and go through some sort of process to get the answers. So that's what the ask is. My point of view is that can happen now. It just can't happen in a public meeting at the same way that a board member could. So everything that they're asking for is able to be accomplished now, except for being able to have back and forth during a publicly noticed meeting. So no member, no one else gets to do that except for board members, and they do get to have the ability to ask questions. They can have meetings with Mark ahead of ahead of meetings, immediately after meetings. I think Mark, I think we could also direct Mark to be very accessible to COC members. And we can indicate that we have very, very, very strong support for staff being accessible to COC members. And I would, in fact, even say if there's any sort of resistance or block that the COC members find in getting any information that they want, I would strongly encourage them to bring that to the board's attention and immediately. And that would be something that we should, that's one of our, I think, roles is to make sure that that happens. So I don't actually see a reason to do this that they don't already have, except for in the finance committee, which was Rachel's suggestion. I actually think that's a really excellent idea, to have the COC be a standing slot in the finance committee agenda, because that is exactly the role there. And to Lucy's point that it's, there are other things like transparency and there are other, areas that, that feed into that. Absolutely there are, but I don't see that there's any restriction in anything that they want, except for the ability to have back and forth during a public meeting. And even this request wouldn't give you that, because you would have, let's say, a slot during the board meeting for their report. And then maybe it sounds like you can use that as a clearinghouse for, okay, so I had some questions on the previous part of the meeting, and I'd like to have some back and forth and answer my questions immediately. Whereas right now, I think, the way that the board meetings are run, public comment is given, and typically those questions are answered afterwards. So I don't really see what this would give them that they wouldn't already have. So my proposal would be that we modify this to be, to Rachel's point, to be just for the finance committee for the 12-month period.
Rachel, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Sashi. As you were speaking, it was very close to where I was going to say is I think what we're talking about today is addressing a problem, a different problem. And I think Sashi was really helpful in articulating what the real problem we wanted to solve, which was the opportunity to have back and forth dialogue. And unfortunately, in these public meetings, that's hard. I'm invited, I mean, I'll just speak for me personally, but I imagine others have this experience. I'm invited to attend meetings, and I know there's meetings happening that I'd love to attend, but I don't, because I think it limits people's opportunity to have a very honest, open conversation when I might be there. And so I intentionally don't attend some of the meetings, and some of them I'm really sorry I'm not able to attend, but I want to play the right role. And you know, when I'm in a position of being a decision maker and I hold that, I wouldn't want one of my COC members to have to get the brunt of a concern from the community. That's my job. I mean, I signed up for that. So I do think the answer is making sure you have access to the exec director in what is happening today. It does sound like that. And if there's a gap in that, then let's work through that and identify how best to address that. Our open public meetings are very limited in terms of what we can dialogue about. And I'm concerned there might be still a level of frustration that we can't dialogue. And that is the nature of these public meetings, that are things when things are not agendized. So overall, I want to maintain the integrity of our COC, so we can say we very intentionally kept this is an awful term to use, the firewall around the COC, so that we maintain your integrity around that. And use all the other open doors that are available. So, and again, I'm open if you would like to participate in the finance committee meeting at a different level, let's do that, because that will give us the additional eyes and lens to how we're looking at the financial information, which is already retrospective. So I think that that's okay. And it could be very real time retrospective, but it's right there as soon as we're able to review it. So I'll go with that.
Thank you, Rachel. Dennis, and then Julie, please.
Thanks, Bruce. Perhaps just a little clarification, and hopefully Emily can help us out. No, we've had this discussion before with Megan. So this is just to receive a report action. So we don't have any approval authority over this action, is sort of what I'm remembering. So I want to make sure we understand what we're being asked to do today. And then as I look at that, if that's the case, because we set the agenda of all the subcommittee meetings, we control whether this is an agenda item on those subcommittees or not.
That's right.
Still our choice, which doesn't change much from today's activities, really, because that can happen at any point, even today. So I guess I want to understand what we're trying to do. I understand this is a recommendation from the Oversight Committee that we may or may not have any actual approval authority for. So I guess I want to make sure that we're just clear of what we're doing today, and
Right.
if there's action needed at all, actually.
I think I'm going to have to defer to Mark on what I'm trying to read the agenda here, coming in late on this. I'm uncertain whether or not it was intended that you provide some direction to staff regarding this issue, or whether it was just an informational to receive a report only. So I will defer to Mark on what the intent, whether it was to provide direction or not. So
Thank you.
Absolutely. And the intent was to be able to discuss it and provide an opinion, not necessarily an action from the executive committee to the chairs of the operations committee, executive committee, and the finance committee, since it's really the chairs that work with staff to establish that agenda.
So to the extent there's no resolution to be adopted, or there's no kind of formal action to be taken, but I think that throughout this discussion, there's direction that was provided and guidance given.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Julie, please.
Yeah, so I just have a question for Larry and Mark. Is the genesis of this request because the current system is not working? Or is the current system and procedures, are they working?
I'll leave that one to Larry.
At this point, we really haven't had a situation where we can say it's not working. But I think there are, well, this evolved when there were committee members who were attending different meetings as part of their oversight assignments. And, as Lucy expressed, there is that 3-minute period for public comment, and something else may be discussed by the board or committee members after the public comments are made. So at that point, there's the feeling that, well, I have other questions now, or that, I want to be able to discuss this some more to get clarification. So, much the way that, I personally have also sat on the other side of the dais, you have your 3 minutes, and then there's a very salient discussion on the topic further, but you want to say something again or ask something again. So that requires something after the meeting, or to come back to the next meeting, or to go through Mark. And we only meet once a month as well. So that's probably where it breaks down the most. It's not like we're feeling that the process doesn't work from the MWPA standpoint, but just the way a public meeting is structured.
And that's a common complaint about the Brown Act that I'm sure, yeah, Larry, you've been on both sides of it, as we each have.
Yes.
And to the point of it is that there's no discussion and deliberation that people haven't been noticed about. So there is actually a good reason to have it like that, because if there's something that hasn't been noticed, that there could be some member of the public who would have wanted to hear about it, and that's the protection that it gives. So it does make a lot of frustrations, but it does also give some very solid protections.
And I will offer in responding to Julie's question, I do feel I'm very accessible to the COC. I think they would agree with that, as have all of our chairs for whether it's operations committee or advisory technical committee. They've availed themselves to be fully accessible. One of the things I do want to express is that we did make it clear in the staff report that even if a COC member, as part of the COC report, is asking questions, we may not answer them at that moment. And the reason why we may not answer them is that we may not have the facts to be able to answer, and we want to give a complete and accurate answer.
Okay, so.
And I know this is an awkward position for that. There's no action item to be taken. And one of the reasons why we went that route is the balance between the authority given to the executive committee compared to the authority given to the full board. And we open it up for deliberation to help guide the chairs of the executive committee, finance committee, and operations committee to get a sense what the executive committee's feeling was on this agenda item, or having this be an agenda on their, or an item on their agendas.
So no action is required, Mark, what you're saying here. This is a opportunity to float this concept of having COC as a standing committee as a part of the three, the executive, finance, and operations. And I've heard, census that Rachel's concerns that, this makes sense on finance. I see it differently. I think that everything we do is about moving money and making decisions regarding where money goes. So I'll just again say that, all due respect, Rachel, and we're on the same committee, and we hear these things, but I do know that it is operations and ATC that they concoct the project, and they identify specifically what they want to do, where they want to do. And all those products come to the finance committee eventually for support. And again, for me, early problem identification and resolution is in our best interests. I'm really not sure, Mark. It seems like we've provided the best best that we can at this point in time.
And so the only other thing is if you feel it would be appropriate to bring to the full board for an action item at the board, then we can definitely do that as part of the November meeting. Or if we,
Were you thinking that this was going to be, you said a decision of each of the committee chairs to decide, or that's, I think, where if it's the committee chairs who are deciding on their agendas, then that is what it is. But if the board or the executive committee as part of the board should be dictating the structure of those agendas, then it should go there. I think your point was that you thought that each of those committee chairs would make their own agenda.
correct.
So
But-
unless you want us to dictate that, I would say it's more of a directional. They can decide what they want to do, and then I guess it would come back to us or to the full board if there was a problem.
That was the original intent, yes.
Thanks for the clarification, Sashi. That's important. Okay. Any further discussion? Let's thank you, Larry, and committee all, and thank you public for that spoke, and thank you board for everybody standing up. Well, there's no decision at this point then, correct? We just move on.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. Well, let's move on to item number 9, excuse me.
Thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm going to need to drop off now. Good to see you all.
Thank you, Larry.
Thanks,
Thank you for
Larry.
all you're doing. Thank you.
Let's see, informational items, governance processes and procedures. Mark?
Absolutely. Good. Moving on, governance. And you'll see that I just added Bill Keene to our list of panelists because Bill supported me with a lot of the research and the crafting of the governance language. And you'll notice that I did update the memo both to you folks in a email this morning, but it's also been updated on our website. So version 1 of the staff report and version 2 of the staff report are available. And I can easily explain the differences between the two memos so that we can compare and contrast and allow you folks to go in a direction that you would like to go with. And again, this is for, it's an informational item, no motion on your part. But it will be, your deliberation will help form, will be an actual November meeting. So the first part of the memo is about the election process and the succession planning for board officers. The second part of the memo is about a code of conduct for the board. So they're between the two versions of the staff report, there are no changes in the code of conduct for the board. It was all the changes were only in the election process and the succession planning for the board officers. Staff recommends keeping with the president and vice president based on looking at other models. And the original staff memo had an automatic succession of the vice president to the president. The original memo also recommended a little bit, probably too strongly in terminology, a balance between the president and vice president being from different types of entities. And the goal that Bill and I were trying to reach was diversifying the board officers. And we went through quite a few deliberations between the two of us. Is it better to group the city, towns, and county as one group, and then the special districts being fire districts, public utilities district, community service district? And we thought that that was a good break. And the more I evaluated that, I don't think it created the diversification that we were looking for. And I think softening it to a recommendation or as a goal, but also looking at the size of the organization and also making sure that we have a good blend across our geographical areas. Looking at size, and when I analyzed the populations and the size of our organizations, 4% of the jurisdiction's population is a good breaking point. It's 8 of the agencies have 4% or more. The town of Corte Madera being the lowest of those quote larger 8, and then 9 have less than 4% of the population. If you look at it fire service wise, all of the larger agencies have at least 2 fully staffed fire stations, and then all of the smaller stations have 1 fully staffed station or their volunteer agencies. And then looking at the Ross Valley, West Marin, and Southern Marin, it makes a lot of sense to also be sure that we're balancing the geographical areas, because you could potentially have a vice president and president come from one geographical area. And I think that's something that we probably should avoid. So that was one of the big differences, is softening the language and creating a better picture of the diversification. As far as the automatic succession of the vice president to the president, some feedback I received felt that it would be good just to have an affirming vote of moving that vice president to the president. Perhaps the vice president would maybe realize that they aren't interested in being a vice president, or perhaps some of the board members may feel that they should not ascend to that presidency. And so those were the 2 biggest changes in the memo. And like I said, the code of conduct part did not change. I did receive some feedback, and I asked the particular board members that had feedback to bring that up, because I think it is better for the board members to bring up feedback on the code of conduct rather than the executive officer. And I'm open to questions. And Bill's available for support as well.
Thanks, Mark. Questions from the committee, please. Seems like there are. Dennis, yes.
Thank you, Bruce. Mark, I just wanted to ask if you and Bill considered a second vice president. And the only reason I bring it up is that in large boards like this, sometimes, and we haven't experienced this, but there's a lot of turnover. And we never know sometimes from one year to the next who that appointee might be. So if we're really looking for some continuity, that might be one way to address that, would be to have a second vice president who could be in that role should the first vice president not be willing or not able or not be reappointed. And so I just wondered if you thought about that.
We did discuss it, and I'll open the door to Bill. He did a lot more of the research than I did, but we didn't find too many of the agencies like ours that had that, the 2 vice presidents. And I just was wondering what the roles and responsibilities between a first VP and a second VP, would they be different? Would they be the same? Would there be confusion if we did that? But Bill, did you want to add anything?
Nothing to add.
But I would love to hear further deliberation from the other executive committee members. And like I said, this is an information item for today so that we can inform the staff report for the board meeting on the 18th.
Rachel, please.
Bill, in your analysis, I'm just looking at it, is it possible to include the number of people on the board, the number of seats?
In the staff report?
Yes.
Absolutely.
As this goes forward, because I think it's helpful to understand the size, because I think the size, because we have a very large, and I don't know if these also are very large, but I mean, it'd be interesting to see.
The size of what he studied, or the size of our board?
The size of the boards. So
the boards that he studied in order to get to this. Okay.
yes.
Yeah, they ranged in, from as large as your organization to as small as 5-member boards.
Because we don't have a secretary, we don't have a treasurer, we don't have, there's other positions on some of these boards that we don't really hold. And I imagine they have committee chairs as well.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. We can add that information for sure.
When we do have a secretary and a treasurer, they're just not board members.
Right.
By definition, I'm the secretary with delegated responsibility to someone else, and then Elisa Schiffman is the treasurer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay, Julie, please. Julie McMillan.
I just wondered in considering the vote for president and vice president, if you would recommend doing the president first and then the vice president second? What kind of order would be contemplated?
I would recommend president first and followed by vice president.
When we get to deliberation, I was kind of holding some of my comments for deliberation, but I think that's something that I think we should deliberate how prescriptive we think we'd like to be on that part of the process, and whether we think it should be very tightly defined or whether that should be left open for the current board to decide procedurally. So I'd like to discuss that when we get to deliberations.
Okay, thank you. Julie?
Do you want a comment on the code of conduct now, or do you want me to wait until after public comment?
Want to handle these one at a time, please? What do you think?
It might be easier for discussions if we discuss the election and succession planning and then switch gears to code of conduct.
So any other questions or comments from the board?
I had one other
Yes,
comment.
Julie. Yeah.
I think the 5 minutes is really a long time for someone to go on and on and on about why they want to be vice president or president. I think it could be 2 or 3 minutes, especially since there's already contemplated to be a written submission with their qualifications. So I think shorter would be a lot better.
I think we should, again, like talk about sort of generally how prescriptive we want to be after public comment once we deliberate, but like, yeah, I think that we should just kind of decide like how much we want to dictate those details. And we could kind of draw some sort of line there, but I think we can do that when we deliberate.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments? Let's move to the public, please.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there is no public comment.
Okay, back to the committee for any further discussion. No motion. Looks like there's been a bunch of staff work done. Some recommendations, some suggestions. Sashi?
Yeah, so I think there I have two comments. One is that where does this information live? And I would suggest that this be that we create this as a board policy. And then I'll bring up later in the agenda when we have suggestions that I think we could maybe have a later discussion on what other kinds of policies that the board should develop, so that my initial thought was, oh, we'll throw it in the bylaws, but then looking at the bylaws, that's not an appropriate place to keep something like this. It is just a policy. So that would be one thing I'd like to kind of hear what everybody thinks about where this information should live, since we're wordsmithing it and all that. Like, is this a board policy or what is it? And then the second thing was what I was saying earlier is the process. I think what was kind of indicated here was, whether or not it was going to be automatic or whether there was going to be a one by one. The one thing I think should be prescriptive, and I want to hear what you guys think, is that I think it would defeat the purpose to have the vote be done as a slate. You need to do kind of one and then the other. I'm agnostic as to which one goes first, how many minutes they talk, how we do it. So there's, I think we should decide in this little group what we think the sort of how prescriptive we want to make that process for future boards, as this would be incorporated into a policy. And what things we think really, like, we just got to make sure those are clear, and then we can leave everything else loose. So that's what I'm curious about for my fellow members here.
Thanks, Sashi. Julie?
I think the more clarity we have, the better off it is. It's already a pretty awkward process to have, fellow board members throwing their name into the hat. And I think clarity is better so that we're not kind of making it up on the fly and everyone knows in advance what to expect. So I would like to set out the way we vote is first you take public comment on the president, and then you vote on the president. Then you take public comment on the VP, and then you vote on the VP. And I would limit the amount of time for the public statements for people who are interested in the VP position.
Okay, thank you, Julie.
Just a follow-up comment. I'm not sure whether that, as far as where it lives, I'm okay with the bylaws just as a standard document so people know where to look. But I mean, it could just be a policy. I don't know. We just need to have it easily available. So when it's posted on the website, it's here's board functions
Totally.
or, whatever it is, however we identify it, just so it's easy to identify.
I did look at the bylaws, and the where it would have to go would be kind of awkward, and would be a level of specificity that didn't comport with everything else around it. So that's why I was suggesting a policy, but I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Just wanted to clarify what my question was.
Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you.
And if I may offer, the code of conduct would be awkward in the bylaws.
So would we be looking to Emily and Mark to suggest exactly where these would reside? I understand the nuances here, but we're looking for recommendations. We're not looking to solve the problem here.
Emily, do you want to?
What is it? A question whether or not they should live in the bylaws or in a
Or
policy?
where Director McEntee mentioned this and maybe other policies, which she alluded to, which intrigues me.
Well, we could have a reserves policy. We could have we can do a little review of what other organizations have that are policies, and we probably could have a little work plan on the kind of policy development we want to do over the next couple of years.
Which I think is fantastic. And I think that's part of the fact that we are a startup and we should be thinking about these things. But then the question is where do they reside? They're not bylaws. So, and if there's nothing to preclude us from organizationally, Mark, Emily, either come up with recommendations, whether you do it now or soon. I guess we need to be clear on that.
Sure. Just as a point of information, there are many jurisdictions, including cities that I work for, that do have a separate place where the policies live. Those are published, those are online, those are adopted by resolution and review very frequently, and it's a good place. This is a policy decision for you all to consider, but just as a point of information, they're often good places for these kinds of issues, as Sasha was saying, to live when they don't rise to the level of kind of a more formal ordinance or certain information like that. So something to consider, and I'm sure Mark and will be going over in the future. But I do know that it is commonly done, and policies are a good way to allow the public to go somewhere to get that information in one place that don't rise to a more formal level.
Just one thought on it. Bylaws would be where you would basically identify that you have these positions, and then the policy, my recommendation would be that you have the policy that talks about the process by which you elect those positions.
Agreed. And that was one of the issues I was thinking of. And just as a broader level, policy, places where policies live can not only include this, but other issues that don't rise to the level of being formal enough to be included in bylaws.
Okay, thank you. Let's see.
Well, so I guess Julie put out that maybe we should be a little more prescriptive about the election process. It didn't sound like anybody else had any objection to that. I don't have any objection per se. If we think it will make things a little bit more, run a little bit more smoothly. It's just a risk of that is that you create something that's quite restrictive that now then has to be amended later. So I think the having the positions being voted on separately is important to clarify. The amount of time, I think that the presiding officer could kind of say, look, we're going to give you a couple minutes, or we're going to give you 10 minutes, or whatever it is, like in whatever that particular group, that one doesn't bother me personally as much, although I have no objection to, saying it's going to be 3 minutes. And then, it's outlined here, like what happens if there's not a majority. So I think that that's important to have in there. So yeah, that's my only kind of caveat is, if we make it super tight, then it does, and then we adopt that as policy, that means that later has to be changed if you want to change that, which maybe is fine. So just wanted to put that out there as a consideration.
And so if I may sum up
Yes. Thanks, Mark.
feedback that I've received today, and so that we can include it in the updated staff report for the board meeting on the 18th, is in the background information to add the sizes and boards, and also perhaps some committee makeups of the agencies that we were using as our research agencies. Clarify that we would be going in the direction of making this a board policy rather than including this into the bylaws. Clarify that we would vote for the president first, then the VP, and then decrease the speaking time from 5 minutes to 3 minutes. I think I captured, did I get it all?
And maybe you could give a little flexibility in that, or as, or the speaking time or whatever, or as allowed by concurrence of the membership. I don't know, you could put some sort of more, give some space there for modifications on the fly if the body should choose to do that.
Okay.
And one item that hasn't been discussed any further was Dennis's suggestion that we think about having second vice president. Thoughts on that?
We could build into the staff report for the board to weigh into, and thank you for bringing that up, Bruce, and have the board weigh into the possibility of a second VP. I guess the question I would have for you guys is, if we do have a second VP, do we differentiate roles and responsibilities between the first VP and a second VP, make them the same? If the president isn't available to facilitate a meeting, is it the first VP that automatically does it, or the second VP? So
I personally don't think we need to create the additional layer there. If we're you could if we're worried about availability or succession, you could say something like, in the absence of a vice president, the secretary will act as or something like that. But I think that it's sort of the if the president gets hit by a bus and the vice president gets hit by a bus, who's going to be who's going to be running the show. It seems like a relatively rare event, and maybe we could have some notion of a policy for succession if by some rare event that those two were not available when something really important was happening. Maybe that's something we need to consider. If that's the problem we're solving, I think we could solve it in other ways. A second vice president, I think if we were going to propose it to the board, I'd want to propose it with a clearly defined role that was distinct from the other vice president. And I don't think we have that information or a notion of that. So I wouldn't recommend adding that in for the purposes of what we're discussing.
Dennis, I would ask you, this has been your suggestion. If you have anything to add, any data points from your experience with bigger boards, having a president and a vice president and a second vice president, is there any principles here or practices that we should be thinking about?
Just only that there's a lot of shifting that goes on sometimes with assignments from special districts and board from cities from year to year, and usually there's some stability at the top from the county and stuff, places like that usually are pretty consistent with their appointments. But I do see in bigger boards that, for example, cities, there's a lot of changeover on TAM, for example, that happens at cities because different members get appointed or they shift to other appointments. And and like ABAG, which is a big board, there's a consistent turnover there. And I was only thinking from the point of view of some continuity would be that what would we do if both the president and the vice president in the new year got reassigned from their jurisdiction, which does happen occasionally. Some of these jobs are well sought after, some aren't. And anyway, so just if that should happen, I think having a plan in place, like Sasha mentioned, if in the case of that, would be good. Certainly second vice president usually would be just in that succession to fill that role should something happen to 1, 2, or 3. But if all 3 get shifted, then you're still in the same spot. So perhaps having a policy how to solve the problem may be a way to deal with that. It just only does set up the second vice president to be more attentive, more responsible, to be prepared for possibly that vice president position than subsequent year and subsequent president. Just so no big advantages, just I think thinking about how to resolve the problem should it occur come some January that we lose our president and vice president because of other appointments.
Thanks, Ned. Yeah, so you're really looking at, contingency planning here in the event of that we have solved the problem. And I advocate for that. I don't think it's a difficult policy to adopt with the possibilities. So yes, thanks for that, Dennis. I really appreciate it. Bill?
Yeah, just one suggestion on dealing with that as I'm hearing that. What we could do is build into this, what we're calling, I guess, a policy now, in the event that one of the officers leaves, that essentially you would run a midterm process where you go through the same voting to bring somebody on, and then they serve out that term. And we could just add that in. That might be a simple way of addressing it.
So to address in the event of, we would relaunch the nomination. Okay. How's the board feel about that? Mark? Yeah.
Well, I was going to add, I think if we do a second VP, that would create a need to amend the bylaws, because the bylaws are where we have the president and vice president stipulated. And I like Bruce or Bill's idea of building into the policy that if we have a midterm departure, that we would have to have a midterm vote. I like that. The other option though, or the other concern I have though, is if, for instance, if using the scenario we're in now, to have a policy in place that if Bruce and Dennis were unavailable to run the board meeting, to have a policy in place and fall back to one of the, my recommendation would be to fall back to one of the other executive committee members.
Yeah. Okay, it's an opportunity then to put those thoughts in print.
Exactly, it'll be included in the next staff report for the board meeting on the 18th.
Okay, everyone, thank you, Bill, for problem solving with us. Let's see, and Mark for that summary. I think we're ready to move on to the core principles. Then are we ready for that?
Correct. The code of conduct.
Code of conduct. Yes.
And again, Bill did much of the work to developing the code of conduct. This was a genesis of a conversation that we had our last executive committee meeting, when we talked about the executive committee meeting actually performing as the governance ad hoc, and a desire to create this code of conduct. Bill did considerable research. We received feedback from a couple of our board members. We used Larkspur, Ross, and some of the other local towns and jurisdictions for these recommendations. And I'll open up to questions, comments, and direction from you folks to include for our staff report coming up.
Board members, questions, comments. Julie, please.
I just had a suggested addition, which is support the board's decisions even if you disagree with them.
Yeah.
Based on my own personal experience.
Well, and support, maybe we should be a little, I hate wordsmithing on the dais, but I think what you're saying is once the decision is done, it's done, and we
get behind it.
We yeah, right, but I think maybe your point is maybe something else that I don't know if this is in the content or whatever, but we're kind of assuming that the spokesperson for the board is either the board president or the executive officer. So if there's a disagreement on a vote, the idea I think what you were kind of going for is that there's not an alternate voice out there speaking for the board. because if you don't, if you don't like the decision that the board made, you certainly have a responsibility to advocate for what you think is a responsible decision. So we don't want to, I think, quell, or cut off, alternative solutions and debate. So I wouldn't want that to be the outcome of this, but I'm totally hearing you on, like, once we voted on it, it's done, and then, live to fight another day kind of thing. So I just want to have some consideration for that when I totally get what you're going for there.
Well, I originally had embrace the board's decisions, but we have on our own town council that the spokesperson for the council is the mayor. We have that set out, but past
We
practice.
have that too in our policies.
Yeah, but that doesn't always work, and people, kind of go off on their own, and then they say, it's their First Amendment right to do so, and then it gets pretty ugly. And I hear what you're saying, Sashi, but I don't want people running around after a board vote and a decision has been made, undermining the majority board vote.
Agreed.
There could be a situation where the majority decides to go a certain way, and then a minority of people are thinking, okay, this is going to be a bad thing, and it's my responsibility to make sure that you just voted us off a cliff, and I'm just making sure that we know. So I want to make sure that that's still allowed and encouraged, so that it's not like, well, so actually, let me put it this way. There have been previous Mill Valley City Councils who put a lot of value on 5-0 votes because it indicated that everybody was going to support the decision. They would, and councils of that era would encourage some debate, but they really wanted to come to a 5-0 vote. Whereas the culture of our current council is, let's have a vigorous debate. And if in the end you don't agree, you can be the no vote. But then, we all, sort of tacitly agree to, like, okay, I lost that fight. You guys all wanted to go a different direction. Great. I'm not going to, continue to beat a dead horse. So there are different ways to do that. I think that are collegial, but that still allow for vigorous debate and everybody to meet their responsibilities in the way that they see fit.
Mm-hmm.
Can I interject one thought?
Bill and then Julie.
Yeah, I think Mark and I did discuss this before we even started working on this. And the idea, I think, was to make, and I think you're right, Sashi, like, there's a First Amendment right. People have the ability to express how they voted and why they voted that way. I think what I would suggest that this executive committee and then also the board do have some standard that says you don't have to necessarily say you like the decision, but that you're not going to undermine it. I think that's the big thing. You're not working against a decision that a majority of the board has approved for implementation. But you're certainly free to continue to discuss, why you voted against it and that you're not supportive of it, but you're not actively undermining it in the press or out in the community.
So I think what I'm hearing is that the concern is about the press, because it should be, and maybe that's what we should kind of address here.
But I think the thing is to work internally, as a board, function as a board. If there is a minority, if we've had some 16-1 votes, right? We've had some 15-2 votes, which is fine. These are decisions. But if there is some dissent, you articulate what your position is. That's fine. It's known and it's on record. Beyond that, I think that we need to maintain the integrity of the board, and then that you would commit to working internally through the executive officer and not go directly to legal counsel, by the way, which by the way, right now that's missing from here. I want in addition that board members work directly through the executive officer. Do not contact legal counsel directly. Period. That we're using anyway. I can articulate it a little bit more effectively right now, but I do think that we need to operate as a body, respect each other, and work through problems internally. And no, we don't want to see a IJ article or letter to the editor, or, as a board, it's disingenuous. It's irresponsible. It's not good for anybody. Anyway, let's see, Sashi.
Yeah, I think just to pull apart some of those things. I think I really like your point about work internally productively towards consensus. And I'm looking to see whether, because I think that some of that was in there, but maybe that's something where we could beef up the work internally. There just seems to be the thing that the problem, just to quote Rachel, like, what problem are we trying to solve? People speaking out in public to the press. So maybe that gets codified, who the spokesperson is for the press. And, Julia's council has that, mine does too, and that's in our council policies. So that maybe that's another policy, is who speaks to the press. As far as as council, I think what you were trying to avoid there, Bruce, was some divisiveness. But I believe that we hire the council and we hire the executive officer. So, a board member has a right to talk to either one of them. I think according to they do. If we want to, I'll give another example. Our previous city manager was really big on, don't go directly to department heads, please go through me so that I can manage their time. Our current city manager says, look, I don't have the time to micromanage everyone. Please just go directly to the department head. I think there could be some style, questions there. Mark might be of the type of person who would want things to go through him, or he might be the type of person, or whoever's sitting in his seat in the future, who would not. But there certainly shouldn't be a prohibition for board members going directly to council. I don't know that we can do that.
I think that's something we need to deliberate over. My bias is that Mark is our executive officer. Mark is our gatekeeper, and he may have 3 board members that have different questions. Mark should be the one that basically collects all the data, puts all the information, and in effect says, Emily, we need a meeting on the following. I just don't think we should allow expend money on in something that Mark may not even have. Mark needs to be knowledgeable of everything that's being done, and I think he's our trusted executive officer. He should be making those decisions as to what to invest in, when, why, and how. And I support every board member, all 17. I can tell you, incredible. But I think we want to minimize independent action, and I think we want to run it through Mark. Sorry. Oh boy, Julie.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Mark needs to be the gatekeeper for everything, really, but especially for outside counsel when we're spending money. We don't want some rogue board member monopolizing Megan or Emily's time. Mark needs to be the gatekeeper. So I agree with that.
So a question on that, Emily, you may not have the answer, but I believe the council reports to the board and not to the executive officer. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. I'll defer to Mark with that internal.
I think that's typical. Mark, is that the way it is?
I would pull up. I need to pull up the actual contract that we have with Epstein and Holtz Apple.
Okay.
To see if it
And then-
clarifies that.
Okay, and then there's another distinction I think that needs to be made, is whether the board member is approaching council as a board member or as an individual. I think that council is typically pretty good at sorting that out. If the board member is talking to council in an oppositional way that is not kind of authorized by the board, the council isn't going to just profligately rack up fees for that. I think they will constrain it appropriately. So that's something I think that legal counsel is accustomed to managing. So I think if the concern is the expenditure of funds, I think we can control that in a certain way. I think that there's also a concern about workflow, and then also talking about trust. The oversight function of the board has nothing to do with trust. It has to do with our fiduciary responsibility. So yes, from an operational and workflow standpoint, the executive officer should be the gatekeeper for all expenditures. But those are my thoughts. I don't feel that needs to be codified. If we later want to try that, I think maybe we put that in at a later time.
Let's see, Bill Keys.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. My experience is typically the board or the council is working on behalf of the board, and that's typically the setup on these types of organizations. One thing I think what I'm hearing though is, and if I were, and I have been in Mark's shoes as an executive director or general manager, is about transparency. So I think what we're trying to get at here with this code of conduct is just behaviors that we want to see in board members, committee members, and staff. So maybe the way to be able to write that up is it's a little bit more nuanced, but the idea that Mark is not caught unaware, the board chair is not caught unaware by somebody going around the rest of the board to work with council or staff so that there's transparency.
Bill.
Sorry to just beat this dead horse just a tiny bit more. I think let me just posit a scenario for you that the majority of the board, or 50% plus one of the board, is going in a certain direction, and then a minority of the board has large concerns that is going to be a bad decision that will have legal ramifications, that will have something. Let's just say that exists. It would be that those board members' duty to make sure that those that they didn't just totally drop it, and maybe there was some way to, like you said, Bruce, work internally. That might involve talking to council. It might involve talking to other board members and kind of less than a quorum, of course, to be within the Brown Act, to kind of understand, like, hey, I know you kind of went that way, but I have some really big concerns here. So assuming positive intent for all parties, there's not, I think what I hear the problem you guys are trying to solve for is a disruptive board member who without any concern for others is just like, well, I'm right and nobody else is right, but there could also be somebody who has genuine concerns and just genuinely disagrees, and we should not cut off opportunities for those people. Bruce, you mentioned earlier, if we're going down the wrong path, I want to hear about it sooner rather than later. Okay, so that person is raising a flag, and not everybody agrees. There's a difference of opinion, but we certainly wouldn't want to make it like, look, you should have let that vote go. It was 50% plus one. You're undermining everybody by talking to people and by talking to council. I'm as someone who is occasionally on the minority end of a decision, like I certainly wouldn't want to have put upon me, look, because you have a different opinion, that means you're undermining everybody else. I don't, that to me, I want to be absolutely not the culture of this board. So that's my only concern.
I don't think anyone's saying that people with different opinions are undermining. I think we're talking about a code of conduct here and kind of rules of conduct that, in essence, you're entitled to have those opinions, and they're real and they're factually based, but bring them back through the executive officer. Don't call the lawyers. Don't ask for 10 hours of time for interpretation or legal precedent or case law. Bring that to the executive. We've hired Mark to run this organization and figure those things out. And it could be that it's an operations issue. It could be a geographic issue that Mark could work through. But anyway, I think we need to entrust. We need to basically keep issues internal, work internally, and let Mark figure out how to solve the problem. And he might go to the finance committee, or he might go to the ATC. But in other words, let's entrust, ask folks to work through the executive officer and not off on a springboard somewhere and go wild and crazy. Anyway. Julie.
Well, I think Bill and Mark have heard both sides of our comments, so maybe they can add some nuanced language that encapsulates Sashi's as well as my concerns in the code of conduct.
I think we can find that middle ground.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure. I kind of lost track of whether or not public comment was opened. I don't remember if it was open for the broader issue or if we need to go back and just make sure everybody's had an opportunity to be heard if they so want.
Okay. Are we ready to move to public comment?
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there is no public comment.
Okay, back for discussion. I think we have concluded. Julie, thank you, Sashi, all, that Mark and Bill are gonna take your advice. And Dennis, please.
Just to add in, Bruce, I haven't said anything. You know, I think this is important to develop this, but I think all of us as elected officials have our own sort of code of conduct that we work by, and that's out of respect to everyone else that we work with. And I think that should someone get out of line, then that's the responsibility of the president, vice president, executive director to help them understand where they should be going and how they should be acting. But I actually don't think many of the electeds on the board are going to pay much attention to the code of conduct, because they already are dealing with their own code of conduct and how to deal with the public and other board members. But I appreciate it being brought forth. So
Thanks. That's a wonderful perspective. Yeah, thank you.
If I could just, excuse me for interrupting, just add one point of view from the legal counsel's office. To that point, I know that we take very seriously our role in making sure that funds are spent in an efficient manner. It's something that we as municipal and public agency attorneys do all the time. And when there is a significant work product that is brought to our attention, I know it's our pattern and practice to go through the executive director, the board, or the leadership and the agency to make sure that that's an appropriate thing for us to be doing. We don't have a practice of just diving in and analyzing legal issues that aren't necessary. So I just wanted to give some assurance that this is municipal law and agency law, something we do all the time, and we're very mindful that budgets are tight, and it's not our practice to go diving into rabbit holes that aren't necessary. So just wanted to add that input.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. Thanks for that assurance. Okay, thanks, board. Let's move on to item 9B, the process for executive officer annual performance and pay review. And Emily, I think that you are up on this.
I am. Let me get up my screen here. Of course, now it's lost. Once again, just to introduce myself, my name is Emily Longfellow. I'm a public agency attorney. I work with Megan at Epstein Holtzapfel, and unfortunately she couldn't be here today, so I'm glad to fill in for her. Before you today is, looks like a discussion item, just to discuss the process to conduct Executive Officer Mark Brown's first performance and pay review. As set forth in the staff report, Mark's employment agreement provides that he is to have his performance and pay reviewed at least on an annual basis by the full board of directors and the executive committee. To ensure that this review occurs in a timely manner, staff has developed the following process for your consideration and discussion. The first portion of this process would involve the executive committee. The committee would hold a closed session with Mr. Brown for his performance review. And during this closed session, pursuant to the Brown Act, the committee may not discuss or take action on the compensation portion. So the first portion, when Mark's in the Zoom room, would be a performance review. Thereafter, likely immediately thereafter, Mark would leave and the committee would hold that second closed session agenda item without Mark present to meet with the negotiator on behalf of MWPA. This is likely to be Sam Zutler regarding the compensation issue. Under the Brown Act, at this closed session, the committee may give guidance and to the negotiator regarding to develop a recommendation to the board regarding compensation. So the second stage after that would, the item would go to the full board of directors. The board of directors would hold a closed session regarding the salary negotiations and hear the executive committee's recommendation from the negotiator. And then the full board would give direction to the negotiator. This is all set forth in the staff report, so I know this is sounding like it's droning on. At that point, after direction, the negotiator would then negotiate directly with Mark based on that direction and return to the board in closed session if additional guidance is needed. So that's that process. When a tentative agreement has been reached between Mark and the negotiator, the board would then need to approve a vote regarding compensation in open session to finalize the agreement on that amount. That concludes the information I have and open for any questions.
And if I can only just add one thing, and the reason why we're coming to the exec committee as an information item to go to the board as an action item is that the roles and responsibilities of the executive committee says it may conduct a performance evaluation of the executive officer. It doesn't say will. So I think the appropriate step is to get the approval from the board for that evaluation.
Thank you. Yes, I forgot that. Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it.
And Bruce, it wouldn't be a meeting without someone muted.
I think you're muted.
Rachel and then Sashi, thank you.
Thank you. I think having exec review, executive officer annual review is an important step. So thank you for bringing this forward. Was there any consideration or thought to add in 360 reviews and self-evaluation prior to meeting bringing it to the exec board?
Yeah, and I didn't want to presume to create my own evaluation strategy. My thought though is that I do need to plan for Ann's evaluation in May, and perhaps I build a structure that I would like to use for Ann for your review to use as your evaluation for me.
It's a nice idea.
Thank you, Rachel. That's a really wonderful, on my mind also.
Yeah, the 360 review is something, if you feel comfortable with, I think it's really helpful just to get what's working, what's not working. And you have so many different constituents that you are working with, because the relationship with the board is different than with the fire chiefs and everything else. So I think it's helpful to have that perspective. So there are many standard 360 reviews out there that can be used and modified. It would be great if you're willing to work with that.
Thank you, Rachel. Excellent. Sashi, please.
Thank you. I've the negotiation process, salary negotiation process, I have no questions about, but thanks, Mark, for bringing up the clarification about whether the executive committee is going to do the performance part of the review. I think one of the most valuable parts of a performance review is the aligning of expectations between the governance board and the staff member. Here's kind of what we're expecting from you, and so that you can know what we would consider to be a success. So in boards that I've chaired, or when I was mayor, we developed some sort of template so that the board members or council members could give feedback on areas that we designated as important, right. and then we reviewed those. So from that point of view, the question part of my response here is how would we take in that type of input from the full board if the executive committee is doing the performance evaluation? So I'm wondering if maybe what we could do for kind of the first round is maybe the executive committee proposes the way of gathering input from the full board, and then we can kind of do that. But yeah, I just want to make sure that piece of it that I think is really the most valuable for someone in Mark's position going forward is, what are you all expecting me to do so that I can meet those expectations? So that's the part that wasn't in here that I wanted to understand how we wanted to do it.
Thanks, Sashi.
And I am a big believer of goal setting, and that was going to be if any type of packet that I would create for Ann would include goal setting. We actually, when I onboarded her, we had a goal setting discussion, so I'll have that to lean on. We didn't necessarily have that with my onboarding, but I recommend that as part of my next performance evaluation, that there's goal setting for the next year. And then soliciting feedback from the full board. I think my recommendation for that would be each of the board members reach out to their fellow board members, each of the executive committee members to reach out to their fellow board members from their geographical area to solicit feedback.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Sashi and Rachel, both for your suggestions. And Mark, it sounds like you're proposing a game plan to build this out in this coming year. Julie, please.
I was just going to say, we have a nifty form that we use every year when we evaluate our town manager that I would be happy to share with you, Mark, if that could be helpful.
Fantastic.
I'll
I have
take it
some of
from,
those too. I can share too.
I'll take it from every one of our member agencies.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sashi. Thanks, Julie, both. Okay, let's see. Take this out to public comment, please.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Great. Back to the board here for any further discussion.
What do you guys think about us developing the questions or whatever that we would put out to the rest of the board? Maybe we have this body take a stab at that, and when we get to that point, that could be a role for.
I think it would be good to let Mark develop that and then
Yep.
we could review it.
Yeah. I think it's important to have going into this coming year for us to provide kind of guidance on what our priorities are, what is it we're hoping to achieve, what we're looking for as far as performance, and then to ask questions of the board in regards to their performance. So I think we have to set it up. Sashi, I think the answer is we're saying yes, but it's something we're going to have to build out and launch, I think, in this coming year.
Yeah, and if I can summarize the feedback that I've received that will be included in staff report is we will be requesting from the board of directors that the executive committee does perform the evaluation, the performance evaluation. I'll be looking at models on how I can provide an evaluation for Ann and recommend that as a process for you to evaluate myself with a 360 review, goal setting, be able to get feedback from other board members, and use as much as I can other examples so I don't have to reinvent the wheel.
So Mark, that's great. But your first statement about the executive committee is going to be doing the performance evaluation after seeking input from their geographic, representatives from their geographic area.
Correct.
Okay, yeah.
We have to make sure we don't violate the Brown Act that way too. You just sort of make sure that they're it's structured so that we get the input and we don't violate the Brown Act before we do come
Great.
together.
Thanks, Sasha.
Right.
And that would be okay. Good. I think we've gotten this one done. Let's thank you, everybody. We're still building this out. Let's go to item 10, the meeting agenda review. Mark, the upcoming meeting.
Yes, and the agenda for the most part speaks for itself, but I do want to mention some things that I think will be added to the agendas post me adding this as a draft agenda because things had come up, and quite frankly, I forgot one of the items. So we will likely add a contract for the project development portal into our website that also includes our dashboard for our metrics. So this is phase 2 of our website development. Phase 1 was just getting the website out. Phase 2 is the project proposal development process built into the website along with our dashboard. We're also likely to add a change for environmental costs for West Marin projects due to the coastal zone requirements. It's likely to exceed the 10% that we have allocated for projects. That's the bad news. The good news is we're running well under 10% in the other geographic for the other projects. And then the item that I forgot was our educational item. And we do have Danny Franco confirmed to talk about his Parks Conservancy project and the fuels map that he's been developing. That's state of the art and well regarded across the state and nation.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, public comment, please.
Looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Back for discussion. No motion required. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Mark. You'll make those additions. We look forward to it. Let's move on to committee request future agenda items. Any requests for future agenda items? Sashi, please. Yes.
So as I said I was going to do, so I think it would be great to put on a future executive committee agenda a discussion of what our future board policies that we might want to develop, just so we kind of have a list of things we want to move towards. So I'd like to suggest that we add that as an agenda item. And then one other thing that I don't know if this is an agenda item or what, but Dennis made a good point earlier about like kind of clarifying, do you want to vote on this? Do you want direction? Is this item going to be direction from us and then go to a board vote? So I don't know whether we want to discuss that or whether maybe we just want to have Mark later on. When it comes to the executive committee, what do you want us to do? And is it then what's going to happen after that? Is it going to go to the board or what? Like, so I don't know whether this is an agenda item or something that we just ask Mark to refine for us.
Message received, and it's something I've been mulling over through this whole meeting after the committee conversation.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Sashi. Rachel, please.
Mine's more of a technical question for probably the cities. Like, what policies do we need to start looking at and moving forward for some of the work that needs to happen? San Rafael just did an emergency ordinance around block challenge for ADUs, not having the ADUs because on small roads in some areas. And I'm wondering if other cities in the county, so some of those type of topics, obviously not to address it today or even next week, but when to do some research around alignment for policies in some of these areas, because I think we can identify some of the city's policies that are going to help facilitate the work of MWPA. And I think that is a real big piece of our role that we haven't really looked at quite yet.
And if I may offer, we've actually created that agenda item opportunity on the board agenda. We just haven't availed ourselves to that opportunity. And I very much welcome that because I think it's a tremendous opportunity to align policies across the different agencies.
Great, thank you.
I think identification, Rachel, first, that's a fantastic suggestion. Alignment, again, of course, is there are 17 autonomous entities and some may not, but I think the identification is critical, what you're saying, that everyone get an equal set of data as far as the critical policies that should be on your, and then potential resolution. So I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Mark, I think that's it. Appreciate everybody. 12:13 p.m. on November 4th. Thank you so much. This has been a very interesting and engaging meeting. Thanks everybody for all your input. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Officially adjourned. Thank you.